Hope. It's a powerful thing. In a world where uncertainty often looms large, hope serves as a guiding light, a beacon that inspires us to persevere and believe in a better tomorrow. Whether you joined us today seeking inspiration, a dose of motivation, or simply a reminder that hope can fuel your greatest endeavor, today's guest will be your guide along that path. Welcome to the Evolve Podcast. Evolve your body, evolve your mind, evolve your soul, and evolve your tribe. And now it's time to disrupt. Welcome back to the Evolve Podcast, where evolved men and women come to disrupt, connect, and get inspired. We're cultivating a strong, lean body, an educated mind, and an evolved, purpose-driven heart are the status symbols of choice. Today, guys, we are honored to be joined by Jen Coles. Jen has a passion for helping people find hope. She has battled with multiple sclerosis for over 13 years. And at one point, the disease left her unable to walk. During that time, she struggled with alcohol abuse. Turning her life around, however, Jen chose to live an alcohol-free life. She found a passion for fitness and lifestyle, and while doing so, she discovered that her purpose was found in all of that. Jen currently coaches breathwork for a living. Breathwork is an active meditation to move stagnant energy in your body. Breathwork has helped Jen manage her stress and anxiety, which keeps her MS in remission. She's on a mission to help as many people as she can understand the healing power of her own breath. And with that, folks, we want to welcome you to this episode with Jen Coles. As always, joining me in his man cave in Oberlin, Ohio is the most interesting man that I know, W. Miles Riley. Welcome, Miles. You are on mute or something. I don't know what you're doing there, brother.
I'm glad to be. Is that better? Is that better?
I liked the hand movements that you had going on. And again, we are really fortunate to be joined by Jen Coles. Jen, thanks for joining us today.
Oh, I'm happy to be here. Thank you for having me.
You bet. Well, your story, at least what I know of it, is a powerful one, and we're grateful that you're here sharing it with our listeners today. Really sorry to hear that some of these challenges that you've had to go through. I mean, what a challenging experience. And I can only imagine what that would look like and feel like. And I think it's important that we approach the conversation today with both sensitivity and empathy, not only for what you have been through, but also for what some of our listeners may be struggling with as well. And so I appreciate you showing up and in your most authentic way. Can you share a little bit about your journey with MS and how it initially impacted your life?
Yeah, I can start from, you want me to start when I was diagnosed or when, clear from my childhood?
Wherever you feel like the starting point is, it's your story.
Okay, well, I'll start from the childhood because I think that's really how it leads up to everything.
Great.
I am the only girl of 3 kids, and I have 3 brothers, and my childhood was really chaotic, really rough. I had a mother who was really abusive. There was a lot of fighting in my home. So as a child, I was always in survival mode. I could never relax. It's always chaotic. I never really felt safe ever to be in my body, to be around my family. And I was always just trying to escape. Didn't have a lot of tools growing up. My mother wasn't really one, she didn't have any tools herself, so how could she teach me tools, Understanding now as I'm older, I can see that she was in a lot of her own suffering as I'm older and do my own healing, and I can see that. So my childhood, like I said, was just very chaotic. And then I also went into a marriage that was also chaotic. There was a lot of abuse in the marriage, all kinds of abuse, and it was really, really hard. And during that time, I didn't know really how to deal with these life things that were being thrown at me, and I used alcohol as a coping skill. And at the time, I didn't really know that I was numbing myself out. At the time, alcohol was fun.
Right. Right.
Yeah, as a kid, you know, I didn't really have a voice or be able to use my voice, so alcohol kind of gave me a voice, and it kind of like helped me be accepted by people or helped me to be seen. And at the time, you know, alcohol saved me until it didn't. So, but I used alcohol a lot to kind of just escape the reality that I was in, kind of run from it. Um, and it was, yeah, I had two kids at this point, and I would say I was 25 years old. And one morning I had just woken up, and there was a lot of numbness and tingling in the left side of my body. I thought I had a stroke. Like I was very weak. I had no idea what was going on. We did not have health insurance, and so we didn't go to the doctor immediately. We kind of just like let it play its course to see what would happen. We did a lot of Google research, and I will say, if there's anything going on in your body, don't wait to go to the hospital. I waited a long time. But I did do some Google research, and it said, you know, MS was the first thing that popped up. And I was like, oh no, I don't have that. That's for old people.
Mm.
And I just remember, you know, I was so weak, and my son was really little, and the left side of my body I always had to hold him in my right arm. But I remember trying to fold laundry, and I couldn't even like fold it over. I had to like throw my hand over and holding his bottle. I couldn't hold his bottle, it would like fall out of my hand.
Wow.
So I felt very, very defeated. Um, so it had been like a few months of this, and I was just trying other things to figure it out, taking all these vitamins, trying things naturally to see what could help, because we had no idea what was going on. So I eventually had left the man that I was married to, and it took me a long time to leave him because I really had nowhere to go. I ended up going back to my mom's house, which is where I was trying to avoid going back into the chaos, from one chaos to another. I ended up going back to my mom's house, and at that point, I did get insurance, and I did go to the hospital, and they did all the tests. They did MRI, they did, you know, blood work, they did a spinal tap, they did in-lab testing, and it came back as multiple sclerosis.
Wow.
When the doctors diagnose you with something like that and you are alone, it was the most terrifying thing that had happened to me up to that point. And I was in such denial. I was like, no, like I didn't accept it. It was too overwhelming for me to accept this. And I just kind of spun out. I did not take care of myself. I did not take care of my health. I did not do any research. I basically, you know, the doctors told me what could happen, this, and this, and I just ignored everything and really just ignored the whole disease. Like I didn't want it. I didn't want to own it. It wasn't my life. My life had already been so hard. This was just another thing that I could not deal with. I did not have the time or the, you know, emotions to deal with this right now. And so I kind of spun out. I did a lot of partying, a lot of drinking, which does not help at all. And
Right.
actually, you know, really worse, really worse. And my the MS, it had been a few years. The MS, it progressed and it progressed and it progressed so badly. I had about, they call them relapses, and that's where your body goes into a flare up, and the flare up can look, you know, anything like numbness and tingling, weakness. It can be anywhere in your body. You can even get them in your eyes. You can go kind of blind from MS because lesions happen in your eyes, they happen in your brain, they happen in your spine. So relapses can be really, really bad. And they last, anything the doctors say, anything beyond 90 days is permanent. So you can be in a relapse for 90 days and then kind of get better. So over this time, I had about, I think it was 4 relapses, and the first 3 they were kind of bad, but the fourth one was really bad. That's the one that took me, I just felt it. I felt it overnight again, the numbness and the tingling creeping up my legs. And I was in denial and I was like, no, this is not. I didn't go to the hospital for a few days and I was like, oh, this is a relapse again. And it was like day 5 I went in, and because I could not walk, the numbness had crept all the way up to my waist. I was so numb, I couldn't feel myself go to the bathroom. When I finally went to the hospital, we did all the MRIs, they found more lesions on my spine. And when there's lesions on your spine, the doctor said that's like throwing a bomb into I-15. That just creates all the chaos in the body and the nervous system. And in the hospital, I was so weak, I could not walk. I had to use a wheelchair, could not get around, could not feel myself go to the bathroom. And I was in there for a while. When I left the hospital, I came home and I was in a walker and in a cane for a long time. It took me a long time to start feeling my legs again. So I came home. I was really, really, really depressed. I had no tools. I was really suicidal. And I just remember that night, I wanted out of here. I wanted to be out. I didn't want to be here anymore. I just didn't see an outlet anymore. So the doctor had sent me home with a bunch of sleeping pills. There was like 60 sleeping pills. And I made a plan, that night I remember just writing a letter to my kids, saying goodbye.
Wow.
And I took all those sleeping pills and I mixed it with alcohol. And the next morning I woke up and nothing happened. I slept the normal amount of time. I didn't feel any different. And I was like, okay, this is my sign. This is my sign to do something different.
Oh, wow. Wow.
What a
So,
powerful wake up call.
yeah,
I know.
Literally, right?
yeah. And I think that was actually my rock bottom.
You know, there's a lot to unpack with your story that I think is helpful for our listeners. You mentioned early on that in the chaotic childhood that you just didn't feel safe, and there were constant opportunities to look for reasons to escape. You felt like you were in survival mode.
Mhm.
Far too many people don't realize that these feelings and that this desire to escape, this when we're in constant survival mode and we don't feel safe, especially as a child, they carry on into adult life in very powerful ways. Typically, people who grow up in abusive settings are people who become very independent and not necessarily in good ways. They feel like they have to shoulder the burden of everything in life on on them. They tend to, like you said before, not go get help because they feel like they have to do it all on their own. And so and they're constantly in survival mode. And these things are things that I'll talk to clients and they'll start telling a story where it's like, oh, I've got to do this, I've got to do that. And they're in this survival mode. And they don't make any connection that these were all links, these were all habits, these were all things that happened because of the trauma of the childhood. And they can all be unlearned, right? These are things that can be changed. These are things that can be adapted. But it's important that people realize that what you're talking about, so many people experience the exact same thing if they've grown up in an unsafe environment. And then this idea of like, how can I escape? And alcohol is an easy way for us to escape. I mean, there's so many different escapes. As you have taken a different journey in life and you've moved in a different direction and you've realized that it's important for you to feel safe. It's important for you to sit in front of some of these challenges and sit with these challenges. That led you on this breathwork journey, right? And so when you started to make the shift, what was it that led you towards breathwork?
Well, that morning I had woken up and I just knew that I had to do something different. What I was doing was not working for me. So I began to heal from within. I found many different modalities, and I was doing this all alone. I said, okay, what are these people that I admire doing? I'd watch people, I'd ask people, what has helped you get through this? And so that morning I woke up and I wrote pages and pages of gratitude.
Wow.
And gratitude really shifts your mindset. When we are living in a place of gratitude, we are focusing less on the negative, and I just was I was thankful for everything that morning. I was thankful for the air. I was thankful for the ground. I was thankful for my car, everything. And then I started finding other things that would help. Like, I was so weak at this point, but I went and I checked myself into rehab, because I knew that I needed help to quit drinking. And I checked myself into rehab. And when I went to rehab, they taught me so many basic things that I never was taught as a kid that changed my life. Like, do a morning routine. I was like, what is that? Okay, I'll do a morning routine. Meditation. They just taught me so many things that, like I said, that changed my life. It was the little things consistently over time that really drastically changed.
Yeah, talk about the routines. I mean, routines are a pretty powerful thing. I remember being taught that early as a child. I was really fortunate with parents that taught me the power of routine and the power of ongoing learning and growth, and just some of those basic routines. But what I found over the years is that was not extremely common, and I think it's even less common now. Where parents are not teaching some of these basic skill sets. So aside from a morning routine and then the practice of meditation, what were some of the other basic life skills that you learned that became beneficial for your growth and transformation?
They taught me, journaling. That was a big one. They taught me, journal everything. Since then, I journal so much. I journal pages of how I'm feeling. Journaling is just a way to release everything. So,
Yeah.
I was able to journal. They taught me how to find my voice again, and I went to therapy for the first time in my life there. And it's
Wow.
something I still use today. Talk therapy is so amazing. It is so helpful. I'm such a huge believer in it. And because it's helped me a lot, and talk therapy it was the starting point of my healing journey as well. They taught me, like how to clean my side of the street, how to own my portion of things, not to be such a victim, and to get out of that victim mentality, because so many of us live in that victim mentality. And so it did teach me that.
So talk a little bit about the talk therapy. I always wonder when people say, well, I don't need to go to therapy, or I don't want to go to therapy. Why is there such a negative stigma still to this day? 2023, there is still this stigma to talk therapy. Why is that there?
Wait, just before you go on, I want to come back to that question because that's really important, but I want to back up just a little bit and ask you a particular question because it's kind of raging in my head and I want to get it out. I'm in the process of reading the book, The Body Keeps Score. And what I want to know is have you investigated, or is there a link from coming up in such a toxic household and that toxicity going unchecked so long in your body? Is there a possibility that the MS could be triggered by it? Because the body will wreak havoc on you.
Yeah.
When you don't address, and sometimes as kids are too young to address things. They have no idea what's going on, so they can live in flight or fight syndrome for years.
Oh, yeah.
And that has to take a toll on the body. And I don't know if the medical community has ever investigated the things that they think, well, there's no connection, but possibly. So that's the question I'm asking you. Is there a possibility that MS could have come out of all the things that you were holding in your body for years, living in fight or flight syndrome?
100%. I am a huge believer in that. In fact, when I teach breath work, It is something that I talk about in the beginning a lot. The trauma in my life, the trauma in my has manifested as disease in my body.
Right.
I mean, think about when you're stressed. There are not a lot of people who talk about this. I think it's becoming more popular now because I'll tell you that my doctors personally were like, take this medication, you know, do this, do this. When I was diagnosed, my brain went somewhere else. It said immediately, there's got to be another way. There's another way. Like there's not just this medication, the mask fit for me. For me, I was like, there's another way. That's why I started my healing from within, because trauma does live in the body.
Yeah.
I always talk about the body keeping the score. Your body is going to remember things that your mind forgets. That's why we get triggered and we're like, oh, what was that from? It could be something from your childhood, you know, and that trauma lives in the nervous system. So yes, absolutely, that is something I truly believe in.
Well, when you think about how multiple sclerosis affects the body, it's just this constant change, constant hardening, in the nervous system, right? And it's affecting everyone slightly different depending on how it manifests. And so trauma and stress to the nervous system affects everything, right? So, I think that's an important thing to recognize. That these things are connected. Come back to the talk therapy. You mentioned how powerful and how important that has been for you. Why, Jen, do you think there's such a stigma around it?
Oh yes, I think people are afraid of therapy. I feel like people think there's something wrong with them if they're going to therapy.
Yeah.
And people, even some people still today have shame around talking about their therapy. I've even heard people hiding it from their spouses that they're going to therapy because of the shame around it. Me, on the other hand, I openly talk about therapy. I mention it on my Instagram. I talk about, on podcasts, how much therapy has helped. You can get so much healing benefits from the talk therapy. And that's a top-up approach. Whereas breathwork is like a bottom-up approach, getting into the body, which I think both are very, very helpful into your healing journey. But therapy was a way for me to get it all out. They give me different perspectives on what I went through or why I actually had a few therapists. They just help me see things as from their point of view. They don't know me. So they have a totally different opinion, but they help me see things differently or tell me, why I'm behaving this way or how things in my childhood have affected me into my adulthood, because a lot of things in our childhood, like you said, show up in our adulthood, and a lot of people don't know that the reason we behave the way we do is because of our childhood.
Yeah. We just think it's normal. And I think, like you're talking about, when we put those things out there to another person who's a professional, and they can look at it and they can, in a sense, become a mirror for us and say, hey, that's not normal. Like, it's normal for you, but that's not a healthy, normal thing. And so we probably should work on that, right? I mean, when I was a kid, I used to take my underwear and put it on the outside of my pants because that's what Superman did. But then when I became an adult, if I still did that, I'd be a little bit weird, right? And far too many of us live with our underwear on the outside of our pants because we just grew up a certain way and we said, oh, that's normal. And other people are like, that's not really normal. You probably should fix that. And I think that, the talk therapy piece, I love what you said. It allows you to get it out there and it allows you to bounce it off of somebody else. I also like something else that you said where you said it's a top-down and bottom-up approach. I don't think that there's one way that works the same exactly for every single person. Why not approach it in a different way? I can't imagine that there is a human being on earth that has owned a car for any significant period of time that would argue with the fact that they need to get their oil changed, that their tires need to have tread on them, that the alignment needs to be balanced, that the electrical system has to work in order to turn the car on, right? It's just crazy and ludicrous to think that we wouldn't need to maintain our car. Right. The body and the mind are the same. Why would we not take a top-down, bottom-up, inside-out, outside-in type of approach? If it works to maintain the body, if it works to maintain the mind, why would we just say, nope, tires don't matter. I'm only changing the oil on my car. Right.
And
But how do we explore that? I mean, that sounds like something we need to explore, because if it's so obvious with your car, but it's not obvious with your internal system, then maybe there's a larger thing at play here.
yeah.
It's a taboo.
I mean,
you know, it's shame.
Uh-huh.
It's taboo. At least from my perspective, I think there's a shame and a taboo, because Jen said it best, that people feel like that there is quote unquote something wrong with them. And frankly, if we're practical, there might be, right? I mean, I remember going to a counselor at one point because I couldn't figure out something in my mind of like, hey, how do I deal with this particular stress in my life? And so what was wrong with me was I couldn't figure it out. But part of what was wrong was that I was a guy that would shoulder the burden way too much on my own. And when he looked at me and he says, you know that this is stuff that you can do this. And he gave me like 2 or 3 things. I was like, oh, yeah, okay, that's what's wrong with me. I'm going to fix that thing that's wrong with me, and then I'm going to move forward. But shame is something, and taboo is something that is out there, I believe, that keeps people from doing the things that make that, keep us well maintained.
Yeah.
I believe that. I believe shame and taboo are part of it, but I think there's a lot more. There's something else that's probably not getting investigated, because if you look up and you think about over the last 25, 30 years, therapy has actually to a degree become normalized. But what is it when you can't talk about what's going on with you? When there's an actual issue of not, and where you just can't talk about what's going on in you emotionally, psychologically, physically, So I think there's probably a lot more to excavate or to mine in terms of this. I think it's bigger than shame and taboo. I mean, that's just
for sure
where I'm sitting.
Yeah, couldn't agree more. And Jen, I know that one of the things that you teach people with the breath work is how to tap into not just the breath, but the power that the breath has to open them up to become more connected to their emotions, to become more connected to the deeper spiritual, ethereal side. Can you talk a little bit about how the breath work is helping people to become more aware?
Yeah. So on my healing journey, I found breath work, and it changed my life in just one session. The first session I did, it was a virtual session. I did it only for 7 minutes, but I was bawling, and I was like, why am I bawling? I had suppressed so many emotions, and I didn't let myself cry. And that's from my childhood, don't cry. So that carried on in my adulthood. So when I did the breath work, I was crying, but not only was I crying, I felt amazing. It felt good to release that out. I felt so much energy. I felt so much peace and love for myself. And I just felt good. I went to the gym that day, had an amazing workout, slept great. And I was like, what is this breath work stuff? And then the next session I did 45 minutes, and I had this very psychedelic experience. I was like out of my body. I felt like I was on psychedelics. It was wild, and I just felt so good. I felt like I had just cleared out. I felt lighter. Like I just rebirthed myself.
Yeah.
And so with the breath, so we carry a lot of trauma in our nervous system. We carry a lot of unprocessed emotions. That trauma could be something small. It doesn't have to be this big trauma, because some people are like, I don't think I have any trauma. But as a child, it could have been something small, like your mom saying no to a particular sucker you didn't want or wanted, or your dad not showing up to one of your baseball games or something. That's traumatic as a childhood. And we store that trauma in our nervous system. We store a lot of unprocessed emotions, and that's all just energy. With the breath, we get into the nervous system, and it gets in there and it closes those trauma loops, and it brings the emotions to the surface. So you're not reliving the trauma you went through. You're actually just letting your body express those emotions that you had suppressed for years and years and years, and so that you can clear it out and feel better, because breath work is very healing, especially with trauma. A lot of people in my sessions, after they do a breathwork session, say, I have been in therapy for years, and that felt like years of therapy in one 45-minute session.
Wow.
They're able just to work through so much, feel so much better, and they leave there just feeling like a new person. And so with breathwork, some people do cry a lot, especially if it's their first session. And it's people were like, I haven't cried in years. I haven't felt my emotions in years. A lot of times the men, men that come to my classes, they don't allow themselves to feel because I think men have they feel like they need to be strong, or they're not allowed to feel their emotions. When they're kids, they're told, be tough, don't cry. They come to a breathwork session and they're bawling for 45 minutes to an hour, and they're like, what's happening?
Yeah. Well, I think there's the men thing I want to tap into, and then a few follow-up questions for you. The men thing, Miles and I have talked about this quite extensively, not just on the podcast, but together as friends. That there's a masculinity that I believe he and I agree with. That there's this idea that men, in society should, as you said, only be strong, right? As if that's like the only emotion or the only way to show up to life. And yet I believe, and Miles, correct me if I'm wrong on recapping some of our conversations over the years, I believe that true masculinity is not just that I'm focused on being strong as a man. Strength is part of it. But if I'm not a person that harkens back to this term gentleman, right? Gentleman was a gentle man. It's a person that has strength, but maybe at certain times chooses not to use strength and chooses to use empathy. It's a person that chooses what's appropriate from an emotional openness to the resilience needed, whatever it is, right? That's what true masculinity is in my terms. It's the openness and the availability to whatever the moment calls for, whatever the moment needs. It's not just this completely stoic, or I don't feel any emotions, or I only lean into one thing of strength. And so I think that's an important piece that we recognize, and especially men start to wake up to that idea that feeling something deeply, and maybe the spillover, the expression of that emotion comes through tears, or maybe that comes through, as you mentioned before, more psychedelic type experience where you feel things in your mind and in your heart. I think that's a critical piece.
Mm-hmm.
Jen, I want to talk about the nervous system piece, and I know we're going a little bit ethereal here. I've always believed that our nervous system is directly tied to the not just long-term memory, but the deepest part of our soul. When we think about the things that, when we say something just rings true, or we have an intuition, or we have a sense of something, we tend to feel it deeper. We feel it in a way that it's hard to describe. But there's not a person that I've ever talked to, coached, or consulted with that doesn't have this tapping into the deepest part of them. When you're doing breath work and you tap in to the deeper part of you, you're tapping into the nervous system, but you're also tapping into the thing that never changes, that deepest part of your soul that is always there. One thing that I've noticed as people go through a journey, and maybe breath work is part of that journey, maybe meditation, yoga, self-reflection, whatever. But as they go through a journey and they eventually come to their most evolved self, or their more evolved self, they don't say, I became someone new. They say, I found who I am. I found my purpose. I became aware of, and it was always there. They just had to remove things from it.
Yeah.
And so I've always had this belief that as we tap into the nervous system, we're really just tapping into the spiritual side. And so it's almost like breath work becomes a tool. Would you agree with that?
Yes, absolutely. In fact, I believe with meditation, it takes 40 minutes to access the subconscious mind. With breath work, it could take 8 minutes. So we're getting into the subconscious mind,
Wow.
which is where our behaviors are stored, our limiting beliefs, and when we unlock that, and we are able to get out of the mind and drop into the body, that is where the healing begins. That's where the transformations happen. That's where the breakthroughs, the clarity happens. And so it's really such a powerful, quick thing that you can do with breath work. And when you are deep in a journey with breath work, it opens you up to your, like you said, to your potential. It opens you up to your purpose. You are able to really discover who you are. I mean, it was already in there, like you said, but it unlocks those parts of you that have been locked up. I like to think of everything in our body, the trapped energy as little knots. And when we do the breath work and we get into the nervous system, it kind of softens those knots, softens them more and more and more. And the more you do, the more you open up, the more you open up to receive, the more you open up to find out, who you are. People will have crystal clear answers come to them. The things they did not even know they needed the answers to. And they're just like, wow, what just happened to me?
What a beautiful way to describe it, right? Those knots become unraveled. We become strong and supple. One of the things I found in coaching athletes in particular over the years is my strongest athletes, the ones that were most responsive, most powerful, were the most supple athletes. You tap their muscles and the muscle is supple. It's responsive. Those were the athletes that could jump higher, run faster, develop strength better. And I think there's something to be said for an emotional resilience, you use the word lighter. You feel lighter, right? And there's a suppleness to the soul when we become stronger. So absolutely
I love when you talk about me like that. Absolutely love when you talk about me like that. I mean,
well, I was thinking about your Facebook post that you did the other day where you were shooting the baskets and then you were punching the punching bag. You looked so beautiful and supple.
Supple?
Yes. You were strong and supple, Miles. Jen, you mentioned earlier that part of talk therapy and breath work has helped you to own your side and not be a victim. Talk a little bit more about what you mean there.
Well, my whole life I was like, I'm such a victim. When I was deep in my suffering, I'm such a victim. Why has this happened to me? This is not fair. Poor me, poor me. And living in that mindset is when I was the absolute sickest, when my health was the absolute sickest I've ever been. Getting out of that mindset, it takes work. Healing is a long journey. It's a lifelong journey. When you are when you are one way for such a long time, it's really, it takes work to change your pattern, to change your behaviors. But like with therapy, a good therapist, in my opinion, will call you out.
Yeah.
I love being called out. I don't like when I need you to call me out. That's how I learn. That's how I grow. That's how I look at myself and be like, okay, yeah, that makes sense. And that's what I need. So a good therapist will call you out. So telling my story to him, he'd be like, wait a second, what was your part in this? What did you do? Let's unpack that. And sometimes it's a hard pill to swallow when you have to look at yourself and be like, shoot.
Yeah, but at the same time,
maybe I did cause that.
At the same time, one of the things that I do really get annoyed about is we've gotten to this place where the word victim, the people who don't like looking at other people's victimization, or the whole idea of stop being a victim. And first of all, you have to be a victim of something. I think the teaching should be you can't live in your victimization.
Yeah,
I agree.
But you have to be a victim to just because something has happened to you.
right.
So, it would be like looking at your 10-year-old self and somebody saying, don't be a victim.
Yeah.
And yet you've been nothing but a victim. You didn't victimize yourself.
Right.
So I think the reframing of the word we need to reframe the word victim is see it. Allow yourself to be, because something has happened to you.
Yeah.
What we don't want is people to live in that victimization.
Right.
And there's a dichotomy there that I think it's important that people understand. The dichotomy is that as you become a more awake, a more evolved human, you tend to be much more open. You become you become more vulnerable. The soft underbelly of who you are becomes more visible, which also puts you out there to be lied to, victimized. Those things happen. Now, ideally, we become more wise along the way. I think about like business dealings that I've had. I'm a very open person when it comes to my business dealings. I'm very straightforward about what I think, and here's my perspective, and I'll lay all the cards out on the table. I'm probably a horrible negotiator in that term, because I want people to know exactly where I'm at. And so if you might not like it, but at least you can trust because I'm always going to be completely transparent. Well, that has got me into situations where I've had people because they know exactly how I think and where my perspective is in the business deal. I've had people lie to me. I've had people cheat, steal, like all of that kind of stuff. And I look at it and say, well, but that wasn't my choice. And so what's my alternative if I do it a different way? I could be more protective, which I don't want to live in that space. I can be wise and say, okay, now I know what I can trust in this person, that they will take advantage of it. And so I choose not to do business with people like that in the future. But I think that's the dichotomy that we have to become aware of, is that while we become more open and vulnerable, and whether it's through breath work, talk therapy, training our bodies to become more lean and fit, like whatever it is, as we become more evolved, we become more open. And so hopefully we become more wise along the way. But I agree, Miles. I don't think it's about don't be a victim. What I think it is don't live in a victim mindset. And, you know, Jen, you mentioned something about how gratitude shifted your mindset. How has gratitude pulled you from victim mindset?
Well, I just, every morning I still do it. I write 3 things I'm grateful for. Because when, I did suffer with a lot of depression, and I did live in victim. I didn't know any other way. I was like, so I lived there for years.
Yeah.
The gratitude just, even when you're sitting and writing to the gratitude and you are having like a bad day, it can change how you feel. If you are recognizing these positive things, and it's going to change that in your brain. You're recognizing these positive things, and you start to feel better. When you live in a place of gratitude, it's hard to have the emotion of anxiety or suffering.
Yeah.
So gratitude and practicing it consistently a lot. The consistency is key to what helped me. Just can really start to shift things. And even still, I focus more on gratitude now than years ago when I focused on everything that was going on in my life. So
it's amazing what that does, because you have to become aware before you can become grateful. You have to observe before you can be grateful, right?
Yeah. And even today, when there's something like, if something went off in that day, I'll even go, okay, but I have this and this and this, or this is going really good. So I'm becoming more aware, even shifting it quicker today.
You mentioned before that one of the things that you learned as you were going through the challenges was that you were taught some of the basics. That comes back to just a skill set, right? As you learn certain skills and then you add others into it, that develops a set of skills that you're able to take into different aspects of life, and it improves your ability to jump in to gratitude or whatever it is in those moments. Because let's be clear, life is never going to become super easy for every person out there. And I think that for some reason, there's this aspiration that, okay, one day I'm going to be at this place where I have all the money in the world and I can lay on the beach and I can never worry about anything. Well, that's not what life is about. And I don't think that should be the goal of life, right? That's not the aspiration. I believe the aspiration should be, how do I develop my skills so that I have a skill set that develops my ability so that when challenge comes, as it always will, I have the ability to jump into gratitude quickly. I have the ability to jump into breath work and change my reality, right? All reality is negotiable, but it's, do you have the skills to negotiate that reality so that it becomes exactly what you want?
Right.
That's the key.
Right. It's those skills, those tools in my tool belt. And, it's like breath work is just another tool in my tool belt that I can access when life does get lifey. What tools can I use to help me get through this? Because we're going to have those challenges. I remember going through one challenge and having another one. I'm like, okay, this is the last challenge that I need. I've already gone through way too much. I don't need any more. But looking back, they were hard. They were really hard, and they were defeating, but they made me and molded me into who I am today. They led me to my purpose. They helped me help other people. And so I have a lot of gratitude for those challenges because they've taught me something. They've given me a lot of growth. And I know I'm going to have more challenges, and I know I'll have more tools to help me get through those.
Yeah. What a great way of putting it.
Why is it that when people certain types of people go through similar challenges to you, other types of challenges. They it's almost as if they do a 180, and it's like they realize something about humanity, and then they say, "I want to help."
I know.
I, I've,
Great question.
I've seen that. I've heard that with a lot of people. Whatever it is they go through, they want to go back, and it's almost like pay it forward or give back, because it's like something in them clicks where they realize there might be a lot of people who are going through what I'm going through, and I want to help. And how would you address that? Because I see that often.
Well, I love that. So actually, when I was in rehab, before I got to rehab, I literally thought I was the only one in the whole world that was going through the challenges that I went through. Nobody else was experiencing things like me. That the things in my family, no one was. I felt so alone. I felt very isolated, very alone. When I went to rehab and the girls were sharing their stories, I was like, I'm not alone. Like,
Yeah.
I'm not
Yeah.
alone anymore. They're going through stuff too. Some of them are going through way worse things than I've gone through. But it
Yeah.
just felt like a relief to feel that. And then, the next morning after I tried to end my life, that very thought came into my head. Okay, I'm supposed to be here. And I was just like, I'm supposed to, my story, my mess is supposed to be my message. I need to turn this around and try to help people because I felt so alone. I don't want other people to feel alone, especially if they're going through like a disease like MS
Right.
and if they're drinking a lot. But there is hope out there, um, and so that's why I was like, and it's taken some time. There was a lot of shame around my story. It's taken some time for me to share it. Once I shared it, I can't tell you the people that have come to me. Thank you for sharing that. I've gone through similar things. Thank you. And just hearing that, okay, someone needs to hear your mess. You need to hear your message. Share it. And it just feels good to help. And you're absolutely right. There are so many people who've gone through the trenches, been dragged through the mud, come out the other side, and they are people who are helping others.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I
It's funny. I
actually,
used to hear all the time that when I did the boxing at Lifetime, I can't tell you how many times, and 90% of my clients were boxing were women. And once I would teach them how to strike hard and properly so they didn't get hurt and they unleash their energy, I can't tell you how many tears at the end of a session. And women would say things like, I just never expressed emotion like that, in
Yeah.
terms of just being pent up with all this emotion and the ability to just strike
Mhm.
tears all the time, all the time.
yeah.
Yeah.
Well, we want
That's
to share. I think it's something innate in us. I do think that there's a altruistic aspect to every human being. We want to share. I also read recently from someone who theorized on that same question of why is that the case, and there's a couple of other interesting points. That number one, we do it from a survival mechanism, because if we can raise our hand and say, "Hey, I went through this stuff. Anybody else going through it?" then we help to survive as a human race. But there's also a tribal connection. We tend to we crave empathy outside of our physical needs. Probably the most dominant emotional need that a human being has is the need to be understood. And I think that once we share, we now have the ability to connect with other people who have been through similar challenges, and we can share in that empathy. Or as Jen put it, I wrote this down. I'm keeping this. I'm going to steal it from you, Jen. When life gets lifey. That is probably one of the coolest statements I think we've heard on the podcast in a while.
I
I
say that one a lot.
Yeah,
Your
that
life
is
is
it. That is a beautiful one. I will reference you every time I steal that, but I am absolutely stealing that. Jen, a few final questions as we come towards the tail end of the episode here. At this point, if we were to take a snapshot at this point in your life, what are you most proud of?
I can honestly sit here and tell you that I am the happiest I've ever been in my 38 years of living. And that
Nice.
feels so good. I'm creating the life I want. I am most proud of looking back at all the suffering I went through and hitting rock bottom and, having my two kids be their mom in that low place. I am most proud of pulling myself out and showing up for my kids like the mother they deserve. Because, you know, having your kids tell you they're proud of you is something that I can't even describe. It just is, it feels so, so good. And my relationship with my children is nothing like my relationship that I had with my parents. My relationship with my children is close. There's love, there's understanding, there's communication. So I'm most proud of the mother that I've become for them.
Beautiful way to describe it. I love that. As you have evolved, what is something that you used to believe that you no longer do?
I used to believe that we came to this earth to work and to die. I really was like, this is it.
That's perfect. That's so interesting that you said that.
That's what I believed. I was like, this is it, you know, and I believed that for a long time. And as I began my healing journey, I was like, there is so much more to life. Life is cool. This is great. Like, it's like an onion. I'm just peeling back the layers more and more, discovering more and more of not only about myself, but other humans, and just living life. It just feels good to live.
What a beautiful perspective. For somebody that might be listening to this episode and they don't feel like life is beautiful to live, what's the first step that you would challenge them to do?
Well, that's a good question. That's a great question.
Yeah, I've been there. I would say for the first step for me is, this one was hard, but it was finding people that inspired me and cutting out. I've cut out a lot of friends that I used to hang out with that kept me in that mindset, but finding people who inspired me, it actually opened up my eyes to life. You know, I watched other people, you know, I watched what they were going through. They motivated me. Their energy was good. Finding those people, I think it's huge.
Pretty powerful. It's interesting you say that. You know, I think coincidence, right, just truly means things coincide with each other, right? Now, I believe coincidence, when things coincide with each other multiple times in our life, then we need to start to pay attention because we're focused on something. You are probably the third or fourth person that has said something similar to that in my life. And one of the things that I've personally been frustrated with at times over the past few months is trying to keep relationships and friendships going, where I'm thinking, why am I putting so much work and effort into this relationship or this friendship when there is nothing coming back? There's no reciprocation. It's a take. And I think I'm done chasing those types of things. There are several people that are inspiring in my life, and my energy is only going to, be invested into those. So I love that. I would echo to our listeners what you just said, that when you find people who are inspiring in your life and you put time and effort into those relationships, life tends to get much, much better. Well, Jen Coles, what an amazing conversation. You have had a beautiful transformation, a beautiful journey up to this point. And we can't thank you enough for coming onto the podcast and sharing your story, your knowledge, your wisdom with people. If people want to learn more about you, about breath work, they want to connect with you, figure out how do they progress and evolve into a higher version of themselves, where do they need to go?
My website's almost done. So for right now, people can find me on Instagram. I'm under that Breathwork Girl, Jen Coles, Jen 1N. And if you're in Utah, I host a lot of in-person events, or I can even do Zoom, one-on-ones, couples, groups. People can hire me for retreats, workshops, private events, and all that. But I'm also, hopefully soon in the future, hopefully this year, I'm creating a course. And the course is going to be around people who have, autoimmune diseases and stuff like that, like I did. And it's, of course, what has helped me get through it, so that people, and I'm trying to build a community so people don't feel alone like I did. So that's in the works, and that's to come soon. So I'm excited for that one. But yeah, for right now, just Instagram.
Great. So we will link that in our show notes as well, so people can find you and then get continuing updates as you continue to grow, evolve, and get more information out there. Well, Jen Coles, what an amazing conversation. I want to thank you again for coming on today. And W. Miles, it's always great to see you. Thank you for being here as
thank you, Jen Coles. It was good first. It was good to see you. I'm glad that whatever you went through, you come through and turned it around and decided to help other people. It's absolutely stunning.
Thank you.
It is beautiful, and what an amazing transformation. So on that note, folks, it is time for us to wrap up another episode of the Evolve podcast. Remember that it does take time and consistency to evolve, but first, you have to disrupt. And now it's time for you to get out there and evolve.
And evolve.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the Evolve Podcast. Follow us on your favorite podcast app, and if you haven't done so, please give us a rating. As an independent podcast, it really helps us get more reach. This podcast is part of our mission to help millions of people evolve into the best versions of themselves. Please check out our coaching services at evolve-cast.com or pick up some of our Evolve merch. Until next time, keep evolving.